Madame, Monsieur, bonjour. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to express congratulations to the 20th anniversary of this SDR, and also thank you so much for including the IEA in this fabulous event. My name is Keisuke SADAMORI. I'm the Director of Energy Markets and Security at the International Energy Agency, and I plan to speak shortly on the IEA's short-term forecast for renewable energy deployment, and then move on to the central role of renewables in the sustainable development scenario in our flagship publication of the World Energy Outlook of last year, 2018. So let me start with the context. So first, global CO2 emissions are on the rise again. Oil demand growth is continuing, and that's led by China and other developing economies, mostly in Asia. In terms of the sectors, petrochemicals and transports, including the aviation, trucks, or the maritime transports, they are the sectors leading the growth. Natural gas demand is growing fast, recently led by China's very rapid growth. Now, renewables are growing fast, in particular in the electricity sector, while renewables for heat and transport are not. One good news from the last year's World Energy Outlook is that the global population without access to electricity fell below 1 billion for the first time. Electrification of the various sectors and the future power systems without the power system designs are the key questions in the energy world today. And policymakers, they need the well-grounded the insights in terms of the future course of the energy. Now, the wind and solar is collecting attention today, but when we step back and consider the whole energy systems, we find that the modern bioenergy play the dominant role. And of course, this is because electricity accounts for less than 20% of the total energy consumption. And bioenergy is the only renewable source that can provide energy for all end uses, including heat in building and industry, and also the transport biofuels. The contribution of modern bioenergy is particularly important in heat. 2/3 of that heat goes to industrial applications. The rest is consumed in buildings, and a small fraction in agriculture. As a result, at the end of 2017, modern bioenergy accounted for about half of renewable energy consumption, as much as hydropower, wind, and solar combined. All these numbers concern just modern bioenergy, so not excluding the traditional use of biomass, such as cooking in developing countries, which causes severe indoor air pollution and premature death. This dominant role of modern bioenergy is often overlooked, and this is why we consider it to be a kind of a blind spot. I do not intend to say that the electricity is not important, of course. As you can see, that the hydroelectricity dominates generation, while wind and solar PV are becoming increasingly important. Electrification of heat in buildings and transport is a growing trend. Globally, electrification of heat expands the 1/3 over the next year, and that represents the second largest growth in renewable after bioenergy. Now, let's see what's coming next. So, modern bioenergy continues to grow, and in absolute terms, its growth exceeds that of any other technology. Solar PV is accelerating growth significantly in the next 5 years, representing over 50% of the total growth. And the share of the distributed PV increases to 45%. onshore wind is slowing, but the offshore wind really takes off with an exponential growth, opening new opportunities not only in Europe. And there's the hydropower. Let me focus on the renewable electricity. So we forecast more than 1 terawatt hour of new renewable capacity installations in the period 2018 to 2023, and that accounts for 70% of the total power, the world capacity growth expansion. And this equals to the entire installed power capacity in the European Union. And of course, China remains the clear leader, accounting for more than 40% of capacity additions. European forecast is revised up, and that's thanks to the newly agreed the 2030 targets at the European level and the announcement of auctions in key markets. But growth levels remain lower than in the previous periods. The US growth is revised down in last year's report due to the recent policy changes, particularly the tax reforms and the trade tariffs. Growth in India will be fast, led by the ambitious targets. And renewable electricity expands, of course, in many other parts of the world. Looking in relative terms, we see that the renewables continue growing by around 1 percentage points per year in the electricity sector. So their share reaches 30% at the end of 2023. On the other hand, renewables grow much slower in heat, from 10% to 12%. While the growth of renewable share in transport is minimal, from 3.4% to 3.8% at the end of the forecast period. So altogether, renewables they pass from 10.4% in total world energy consumption to 12.4% by the end of 2023. And let me repeat that this does not include the traditional use of biomass. And this is not surprising that the increase of the overall renewable share is very similar to heat. And because heat represents half of the final world energy consumption. While this is an important increase by 20% increase, but it is by far not on track to achieve a trajectory in order to stay on path to the ambitious long-term sustainability targets compatible with the Paris Agreement. I heard from Mr. Bal that there will be a session this afternoon focused on the African region, so let me see a little bit of what will happen in the sub-Saharan Africa. So in sub-Saharan Africa, the renewable capacity is forecast to grow by 70% from a small base during the 2018 to 2023 period, and they will reach total of 64 gigawatt by 2023. And the hydropower is expected to lead renewable growth in the region as a single technology, growing by 12 gigawatt, as Ethiopia alone brings 5 gigawatt of capacity expansion. Non-hydropower technologies are anticipated to account for over 50% of all new capacity additions, and that's a new trend in the region. And here you can see that the solar PV capacity is forecast to quadruple by 2023, with the majority of additions from the utility scale projects, often contracted through the auctions. So South Africa, Nigeria, Senegal, and Zambia lead the PV growth. So overall, a quarter of the PV capacity growth in sub-Saharan Africa is set to come from the off-grid applications, reaching over 3 gigawatt by 2023. Of course, due to the lower the electrification levels, the growth in residential PV happens in off-grid environment. And off-grid solar PV is expected to play an important role in electrification rates in areas where the expansion of the grid is not scheduled in the immediate future. Industrial applications, mini-grids, and the small solar home systems are bringing bridging the electrification gap of the region. And we expect that this growth will provide 30 million people in the region with the initial electricity services. Growth could be 50% faster if sound policies are put in place, starting with the strong risk mitigation mechanisms, such as the one that France, India led the ISA, International Solar Alliance, is attempting to develop. And we at the IEA also work with the ISA, and we are drafting a guide for the governments to develop the solar roadmap, how to guide on the solar systems. Now, let me turn to the longer-term world energy outlook scenarios. The World Energy Outlook's central scenario, NPS, shows the energy mix based on the current level of policy ambitions by the governments around the world. And here's the European electricity mix in the new policy scenario in 2040, and driven by until the 2030 by the new EU targets. So you can see that the coal generation goes down significantly to less than 5% in 2040. Nuclear capacity in Europe is projected to decline by around 1/3 during this period, mostly driven by the retirements of the old plants. Natural gas provides flexibility to the European grid, while variable renewables further growth the increase rapidly to reach the new 2030 targets. After 2030, improve the energy efficiency, and the future growth of renewables drives the gas share slightly down. A sizable expansion of the bioenergy and refurbishment of the existing large-scale hydro plants drive the growth of dispatchable type of renewable generation. Solar PV, the electricity generation is projected to almost triple and surpass coal generation after 2030. And wind becomes the largest contributor to the European electricity mix by 2027. It will generate 1,100 terawatt-hour, and that's equivalent to my home country, Japan's power demand today. Solar may be cheaper, but in Europe, wind power has a much better match with the demand peaks, which happens in wintertime. So the share of variable renewables is expected to reach 40% by 2040, and calling for the increased flexibility on both demand and the supply side. So this is coming from the NPS, World Energy Outlook's central scenario, which represents the current level of policy ambitions by the governments around the world. But the new policy scenario will not achieve the emission peak until the period until the 2040, and so and it's far above the path required in this sustainable development scenario. So its efficiency and renewables should fill the majority of the gap, but the other low-carbon technologies, nuclear, CCUS, and all other low-carbon technologies must be fully exploited to achieve this sustainable development path toward the 2040. In the sustainable development scenario, the use of coal is significantly reduced, while that of the natural gas is roughly maintained. The bulk of the growth in total power generation should be achieved through the increased nuclear, but more importantly, increased wind, solar, hydropower, and other renewable generation sources. The sustainable development scenario. So this one shows what are needed to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals closely related to energy sector. So SG 13, so tackling the climate change in accordance with the Paris Agreement. SGD 7, achieving the universal energy access by 2030, and reducing the impacts from the air pollution. This scenario then works back to set out what would be needed to deliver these goals in the most cost-effective way. So as a result, with respect to, so this will lead to the good results in terms of the CO2 emissions, and also the electricity access will be fully achieved, and also would bring about very good results in terms of the air pollution. Achieving these outcomes, of course, would require the profound transformation in the way that we produce and consume energy. So, several the conclusions. I do not plan to read all of them, but of course, I would like to repeat again that, I'm sorry, I skipped too fast. So there's no single solution to turn the emissions around, and we expect that the efficiency and renewables would be the mainstream, but also the other low carbon technologies, CCUS, nuclear, or even hydrogen, they all need to be fully mobilized to get to the emission path consistent with the Paris Agreement. And also we consider that it'll be crucially important and that we see the solid growth path for the renewables. And so we are determined to work with all the stakeholders in order to achieve this the sustainable energy path in a secure and affordable way. So thank you very much for your attention.